Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Helen stepped out of the house into the yard, and for the first moment, the bright spring sun made her squint. Then she looked around and, as always, couldn't help but smile. What beauty there was all around. The apple trees stood, covered in large, delicate pink blossoms, giving off a subtle fragrance. The emerald green grass of the lawns felt like velvet underfoot. Above, a bright blue sky stretched out with lush, slowly drifting white clouds. The whole yard was bathed in warm, gentle light. On the sun-drenched playground, a little girl was swinging rhythmically. She was very pretty, dressed in a light white sundress. Her long chestnut hair soared up and then fell down, following the rhythm of the swing. "So, this is where you are." Helen smiled, recognizing the little one, and headed towards the swings. The girl, noticing the approaching woman, laughed heartily and stopped swinging. The swing gradually slowed its movement, freezing in the air. "What, is it time for breakfast already?" the girl asked, looking directly at Helen with her clear eyes. Helen nodded, and once again her heart ached at the thought that this little one could have had a completely different childhood. The girl didn't even suspect what misfortune had threatened her a few years ago. Perhaps when the little one grows up, her parents will tell her this story. But now Annie is only 3 years old, and she doesn't need to know about such terrible things. She enjoys a happy childhood, bathed in the love and care of her parents and loved ones. The beautiful nature around her seems like a natural backdrop to a serene life. And she is always there beside her, Helen, her guardian angel. That's what the child's mother and father believe, confident that the woman truly played a huge role in Annie's fate. They are grateful to her for every day their daughter lives. Helen was never a beauty, not in childhood, not in her teenage years, not in youth. She used to suffer greatly from this, spending hours looking at her expressionless face in the mirror. A formless nose, small eyes of an unclear grey colour, short eyelashes, thin lips, fleshy cheeks. She saw only flaws. Not ugly, of course, but she couldn't be called sweet or pretty either. Her ordinary figure matched her face, short height, full hips, almost complete lack of a waist. She wasn't fat or awkward, just completely unremarkable. Nature seemed to have deprived Helen of bright colours, medium brown hair, pale eyelashes, pale skin. Some of these problems, of course, were solved with makeup. But the girl's appearance remained unremarkable even after she spent a lot of time on makeup. How different she was from her friend Alice, a big-eyed beauty with a thick braid down to her waist. Or her classmate Sarah, slender, tall, striking. Boys chased after them. They were always the centre of attention. It seemed that with such looks, all doors in life were open to them. Not like the invisible Helen, who always remained in the shadows. By the way, Helen didn't shine in class either. Her academic abilities were quite average. Higher, of course, than Alice's, but Alice didn't have to try her hardest. Alice was everyone's favourite with those big eyes and dazzling smile. But Helen, she herself felt like a grey mediocrity, and the girl suffered greatly from this. Her parents didn't understand her feelings, didn't share them. Healthy, hands intact, legs in place, Helen's mother listed, looking at her despondent daughter. Eyes see, ears hear. Look how many disabled people and people with real physical defects there are around, and don't anger God. She believed her daughter was just being whimsical. "And anyway, calm down," her father joined the conversation. "You know you can't drink water from a face. But the fact that you got a C in algebra again, that's bad. Worry about that instead." Her parents, old-fashioned people, considered fussing about appearance to be foolishness and a whim. They advised Helen to think more about her studies. The girl tried, of course. Once she decided that since she was so unlucky with her appearance, she would become an outstanding specialist in some field. But no matter how much Helen studied textbooks, no matter how much she sat over notebooks, nothing truly worked out. Formulas remained a foreign language, historical dates got mixed up in her head. Russian language rules looked like a set of complex, incomprehensible words, and Helen had no special talents. Some of her acquaintances sang, some played musical instruments, some excelled in sports. But Helen couldn't do anything, absolutely nothing, better than others. In childhood, she signed up for various clubs, deliberately searching for her life's work, but never found it. Helen, in her teenage years, genuinely cried because of her greyness and mediocrity. After all, she tried so hard, but nothing ever worked out at a high level, and her parents didn't support her, sometimes even scolding her for despondency, and as they saw it, pride. "Not everyone can be beauty's talented," her mother was angry. "Well, what now, since it turned out this way? But you're healthy, strong, that's the main thing. The country relies on people like that, not on those big-eyed dragonflies." These words made Helen feel even worse, because more than anything in the world, she wanted to be exactly like that, a big-eyed dragonfly. Boys paid her no attention, and Helen considered this quite natural. Why would they? She had neither striking looks, like Alice or Sarah, nor special intelligence, like the excellent student Kate, whom everyone respected for never refusing anyone who wanted to copy homework. It was especially hard to see Alex, a classmate who made Helen's heart pound wildly just by looking at him, gazing at other girls. He didn't notice her at all. Alex sometimes even forgot to say hello, walking past her as if she were empty space. Sometimes Helen was angry at fate and her parents, who had endowed her with such expressionless genes. Sometimes she dreamed that when she grew up, she would get several plastic surgeries and turn into a beauty. But more often than not, she just sighed, looking at her beautiful classmates, and wondered how unfair life was. The only thing the girl liked from about the age of 10-12 was interacting with small children. Sweet, funny, trusting little ones always cheered Helen up. It was so easy to surprise them, so simple to make them happy. They didn't pay attention to Helen's appearance. Her academic success and intelligence didn't matter to them. Children felt they were welcome and repaid with happy smiles, cheerful laughter, and sincere love. Mothers in the yard were always happy when Helen came out of the entrance because the little ones immediately rushed towards her. She knew how to organize fun games for them, knew how to please them. For these boys and girls, Helen became the center of the universe for a long time. The little ones even cried when their parents tried to take them home in the middle of a game. "You have a talent," one of the young mothers said one day. "Not everyone knows how to connect with small children." She had a very capricious and disobedient son, but next to Helen, he transformed. The little one turned into a smart, compliant child. Talent? Helen thought she had misheard. Did she have talent? No way. What's so special about playing with little ones? Anyone can do that. It doesn't take much intelligence. "Maybe you could be a good preschool teacher," the mother of the little boy, who clung trustingly to Helen's hand, said thoughtfully. That's when the girl first thought about choosing a profession. Well, maybe she really could become a preschool teacher. She genuinely enjoyed interacting with small children, and most importantly, she was good at it. Helen was already about 14 years old then, and high school graduation was not far off. It was time to think about a specialty, especially since the girl definitely wasn't planning to go to the 10th grade, because after trying it, she had come to understand that studying wasn't for her. Her parents supported their daughter's choice to go to college after 9th grade. "That's right," her father praised. "No need to waste time in school. You'll have a profession in your hands. You won't be lost in this life." He was confident in his decision. "We're not particularly capable in academics," her mother sighed. "You can't jump over your head, apparently. None of us have a higher education, and it seems you won't either." Helen knew that her mother had strongly hoped for a different outcome. She wanted her daughter to study and make something of herself, maybe even become some kind of boss. But Helen's school performance gradually brought the ambitious parent back down to earth. The woman was very disappointed by this turn of events and didn't particularly hide it. Her disappointment caused her daughter real pain. But upon learning that Helen wanted to become a preschool teacher, her mother and father expressed their displeasure. "What kind of profession is that?" Her father was indignant. "Wiping snot off other people's children for pennies. Nonsense." He considered this occupation unworthy. "Agreed," her mother agreed. "Preschool teachers' salaries are tiny. The responsibility is huge. Children's parents, you know what they can be like. They won't give you any peace." So Helen went to study to be a seamstress, because this profession, according to her mother and father, was supposed to bring their daughter happiness. "Always have money, always needed by people," her mother counted on her fingers, listing the advantages of being a seamstress. "You can take on side jobs too, and you'll sew for your own family. Just imagine the savings." Studying was difficult for Helen. For most of her classmates, the work literally flew through their hands, but Helen invariably produced crooked seams and distorted patterns. Later, of course, she learned thanks to her innate persistence and diligence, but she remained, as always, at an average level. But her parents were satisfied and calm. Their daughter had a reliable profession. Helen no longer played with the little ones. She had grown up, and college studies took up a lot of time. But if she happened to interact with the small children of acquaintances, she would literally blossom. Her face would light up with a warm smile. "Oh, we'll have many grandchildren, your father and I." Her mother smiled, seeing her daughter's interest in children. "Well, I'm not against it," her father nodded, "as long as she finds a decent son-in-law who can provide for the whole brood." He was already making plans for the future. But Helen's parents' dreams didn't come true. Helen dreamed of having her own children from about the age of 14-15. She simply couldn't imagine her life without the ringing laughter and the patter of little feet around the apartment. But somehow it just didn't happen. Crowds of admirers never swarmed around Helen. The girl accepted and realized this fact quite early. But the time came, and young men did start paying attention to her. Of course, they weren't handsome, recognized leaders like her former classmate Alex, but the girl was still happy. It turned out it was so pleasant to feel that a guy was interested in you. It gave her confidence. Such a guy was Mike. He lived in the neighboring yard, and Helen had known him since childhood. Back then, he was one of the crowd of neighborhood boys, just like her, grey, unremarkable. Not a hooligan, but not a brilliant, talented student either. He studied at a construction college and got a job at the local factory. Mike inherited an apartment from his grandmother, a small one-room apartment in an old building, but it was his own. and under pressure from relatives, he decided it was time for him to get married, to start a family. Mike's gaze fell upon Helen. Why not? A girl from a respectable family, modest, hard-working, good at housekeeping, without excessive demands. Perhaps Mike dreamed of bright stars like Alice or Sarah, but the young man realistically assessed his chances. Spoiled beauties would require him to keep up, to work hard, to constantly improve himself. But with Helen, a calm, quiet life awaited him. He chose reliability. One day, Mike simply met Helen at the bus stop. She was returning from the sewing factory, where she had recently started working. "Hi," the guy smiled at her, so easily and naturally, as if they were close friends. A surprised Helen greeted him back. Mike said he had specifically waited for her at the stop for half an hour. This news made the girl's heart pound. Really? Had a guy finally paid attention to her and even done something for Helen, waited for her at the stop for so long? Of course, the girl allowed him to walk her home. Mike walked beside her, talking about his studies and work, asking Helen about things, and then he took her hand. It was a very gentle gesture that told the girl a lot. Mike walked Helen to her building entrance and, slightly embarrassed, said, "Are you free tomorrow? There's a new movie with Jim Carrey showing at the cinema. Maybe we could go together?" "I adore that actor," Helen smiled broadly. "Of course, we'll go." That evening, the girl couldn't fall asleep for a long time, recalling every detail of the walk with Mike. He looked at her like no one had before, interested, attentive, even it seemed with admiration. As if he didn't notice how grey and ordinary she was. As if he saw not an unattractive girl, but someone else, someone special. It was incredibly pleasant. Helen finally felt like a pretty girl, attractive, worthy of love and interest, almost like Alice, Mike himself. He had never evoked romantic feelings in Helen, no feelings at all. To be completely honest, the girl hadn't even paid attention to him. But today, the guy appeared before her in a completely different light. It turns out he could be decisive and gentle at the same time. Strength and reliability were clearly felt in him. And when had Mike grown up? When had he turned into a real man? The next day they went to the cinema, and there in the dark hall, Mike, mustering courage, kissed Helen. The girl's head spun and her ears rang. It was so unexpected and so pleasant at the same time. Her first kiss. It finally happened. She finally felt feminine. It was simply a miracle. "I like you very much," Mike said quietly, so as not to disturb the other viewers. "Let's go out." "Let's," Helen immediately agreed. Her cheeks were burning, but in the dark it probably wasn't visible. And they officially became a couple. Helen's life changed greatly from that moment on. It included dates, flowers, trips to the cinema, circus and cafes, birthdays of Mike's numerous friends, kisses, walks under the moon. All this lifted her spirits, made her feel special, brought joy, and filled her with energy. Helen tried not to notice that Mike himself was clearly not the hero of her romance. Although perhaps Helen was still a little in love with him then. At least, she was grateful to him for showing her what it was like to be special and attractive. And also, Helen finally calmed down. She had wanted to become a wife and mother since she was very young, when other girls dreamed of a career as a fashion model or an expensive car. But Helen, even in those years, imagined herself as a mother of many children. But as she grew older, Helen became seriously worried. She was so grey, unremarkable, and there were plenty of beauties around. What if there wasn't a person in the world willing to marry her? What if no one ever liked her and she remained alone? And then Mike appeared, so attentive, caring, and in love. Helen somehow calmed down. The fear of being alone evaporated somewhere. Now her dreams finally had a chance to become reality. About a year later, Mike proposed to Helen. They were walking along the embankment then, discussing the movie they had just seen at the cinema. And suddenly the guy blurted out, "Helen, let's make things official. We have a place to live. I have an apartment. You know, I'm so tired of being alone." Not the most romantic proposal, but Helen gladly agreed. Mike's words were not a complete surprise to her. Everything had been leading up to it. They had a modest wedding. Helen's mother quietly wiped away tears with a handkerchief, perhaps from excitement or from unfulfilled hopes. Her mother-in-law smiled thinly. Her face didn't express much joy. The father-in-law and the bride's father, engrossed in conversation and a glass, showed no interest in the proceedings whatsoever. The toastmaster, smiling drunk relatives, silly contests. Everything went, according to the groom's and bride's parents, as it should. As for Helen, she really wanted this difficult day to finally end. She dreamed of being home, in Mike's apartment, where they were now to live together. The bride pulled off her puffy, itchy dress with relief and let down her hair, which had been gathered in a tight bun all day. By that time, the drunk, exhausted groom was already snoring loudly on the sofa. The married life of Mike and Helen began. Both worked, then returned home. He would lie on the sofa in front of the TV. She would rush to the kitchen to cook dinner. It was a typical average family, without great ups or downs. Mike, having become Helen's legal husband, considered his mission complete. He no longer invited her to the cinema or for walks, and if he paid compliments, it was only to the latest dish his wife had prepared. His romantic ardour quickly faded. Helen was basically fine with this. At home, it was exactly the same. Ordinary family life, no better, no worse than others. At least she had a husband, like everyone else, not some old maid. And soon children would come, and Helen's cherished dream would finally come true. Everything else wasn't so important. The main thing was to become a mother. But nothing worked out with the children. A year passed since the wedding, then 2, 3. Parents on both sides hinted that they wanted to become grandparents. Helen would have been happy to fulfill their wish, and most importantly, her own dream. But it just didn't happen. Mike didn't particularly suffer from the absence of heirs. His life was good enough as it was. His wife took care of him, fed him, ironed his clothes for work, cleaned the house. And if children appeared, where would she find the time for all that? So the man didn't bother himself about it. "It's okay. People live without children," he reassured his wife, not understanding the depth of her feelings. But in response to these words, Helen wanted to hit Mike over the head with something heavy. She had only gotten married to finally become a mother. Her mother-in-law signed Helen up for a medical centre for examination. "Something is probably wrong with you," she shook her head, hinting at her fault. It was hurtful to hear such things. Helen felt as if Mike's relatives considered her defective. However, her own parents behaved no better. "Ah, it seems you inherited your grandmother's genes," her mother lamented. "You know your father has an aunt, she's your father's cousin, and she's infertile. You seem to have taken after her." Helen underwent examinations, and it turned out that everything was fine with her. "Perhaps the reason is with your husband," the doctor shrugged. "Or incompatibility, that also happens. In any case, your husband needs to be examined." But Mike flatly refused to go to the clinic. "What nonsense! What do I have to do with it?" he protested. There have been no problems with men in our family. I'm not going." Helen begged, persuaded, even cried, to no avail. Mike considered visiting a medical centre almost a humiliation, and his family supported him in this. "She probably messed around in her youth, didn't take care of herself, and now she's trying to blame us," her mother-in-law said one day, not hiding her malice. It was so painful and offensive that Helen didn't even know how to respond. Her heart ached from the injustice. Relations with Mike became colder and colder. One could say there were no relations at all. The spouses barely communicated, they just lived together like neighbours. Therefore, Helen was hardly surprised, and certainly not upset by the news that Mike had another woman. He admitted everything himself, directly, without trying to choose his words. "Helen, you'll have to move out of here. 1 week's notice. We're getting a divorce." "What?" The woman didn't understand, stunned by his bluntness. "That's right. I have another woman, from work, from the institute. She's already pregnant with my child, so we're getting a divorce." "Well, this is news," Helen gasped, although deep down she had long felt that something was wrong. "That's the news," Mike agreed. "See, I'm normal, and you were dragging me to the hospital. You're the one who can't have children. I'm fine in that department. We're expecting twins." "But you said you didn't want children," Helen clarified, trying to understand his logic. "Didn't want them then, want them now," her almost ex-husband retorted. "A man needs heirs, offspring." His words sounded cold and selfish. Helen returned to her aging parents' home. Where else could she go? The foolish, absurd marriage had lasted quite a long time by local standards, almost 10 years. Many of her friends, former classmates who got married the same year, had divorced much earlier. Only almost all of them had managed to become mothers, and Helen envied them. Yes, raising children alone is hard, but it's still much better than living without beloved little ones of your own. Then Helen still had hope. She had just turned 35, an age that still allowed her to become a mother. But water doesn't flow under a lying stone, and the woman understood that she had to pursue her dream, do something to make it happen. At the very least, she needed a man, because a child should have a father. That's where things didn't work out. Helen felt like a grey mediocrity again, a shadow, an invisible person whom the opposite sex didn't notice. By the age of 35, Helen had gained weight, her hair had become even thinner, and the first, barely noticeable wrinkles had appeared. She still hadn't learned to dress stylishly, and nothing looked good on her awkward figure anyway. The charm of youth and freshness had irrevocably gone. It was sad. But still, a few more romances happened in Helen's life, which, however, never ended in anything serious. The woman celebrated her 45th birthday alone. It was a Monday, an ordinary weekday. By that time, her parents were no longer alive. First, her father passed away from a heart attack. 2 years later, her mother followed him. The same heart condition. Helen, of course, found it very difficult to cope with such losses alone. Yes, the woman had friends, but they all had children, families, their own worries. They couldn't devote all their time to Helen, and she didn't demand it. She perfectly understood how busy they were. On her 45th birthday, on the way home from work, the woman bought herself an expensive cake from the best confectionery in the city, and even bought candles for it. And now she sat in the dimly lit kitchen, looking at the flickering little lights and thinking about her failed life. Well, her best years were clearly behind her. How quickly time had flown. Her cherished dream had not come true. She had no children, and now, of course, she never would, and no husband either, and no close person at all to lean on in a difficult moment. On the other hand, she was relatively healthy, not yet completely old. She had a home and a job she didn't much like, but which provided a stable income. So maybe she didn't have much to complain about. But why then was she so sad, so unbearably gloomy inside? No, Helen didn't want to sit alone in the kitchen on a day like this. She decided to go to the shopping centre, walk around the shops, sit in a cafe, get a change of scene. There in the crowd it was simply impossible to feel lonely. It was bright, noisy, cheerful and beautiful there, because the new year was coming soon and the city had already dressed up for the holiday. Helen quickly got ready and called a taxi. If she was going out, she was going out properly. And in 10 minutes she was at the shopping centre. Music blared from everywhere. People were choosing gifts for the approaching main holiday of the year. Many of them were with children. Helen admired such families, happy, and yet not even understanding their own happiness. Here a young mother irritably scolds her 3-year-old son for whining. And the little one. He's just tired, but how can she not understand that? And here, very young parents are scolding their daughter, about 6 years old. The girl was crying and asking to buy her a doll. Oh, if only Helen had a child, she would never scold or reprimand them. After all, everything can be explained calmly. It just takes a little patience and attention. Helen went to the clothing department, hoping to find something interesting. There was a work party soon. It would be nice to come dressed up and beautiful. But Helen only got upset in that department. Whatever the woman put on, she didn't look at all the way she wanted to. She had to leave the sales floor without any purchases, feeling disappointed again. But in the confectionery shop, the woman left a significant amount. She simply couldn't pass by her favourite eclairs and pastries. And she still had cake at home. Yes, Helen had a sweet tooth. She needed to get pleasure from something in life. Yes, she knew about the harm of sugar and pastries, but she couldn't help herself. One of her colleagues once remarked that Helen was eating away her stress. That was probably true. Her whole life was a kind of stress. Helen could not come to terms with her loneliness and unsettledness. Panic seized her at the thought of old age, which she would have to meet in an empty, cold house, and that time was not far off. Helen sighed and pushed away the unpleasant thoughts. She looked at her watch. It was late. The centre was closing soon. It was probably time to go back, especially since tomorrow was a work day and she had to get up early again. The woman went out onto the porch and scanned the spacious parking lot. Could she see a free taxi anywhere? She clearly didn't want to trudge to the bus stop in such darkness and bad weather. The frost was getting stronger, the sky was clear and clean, and the stars shone brightly in it. It would probably be cold again tomorrow. She should hang a bird feeder outside the window. It's hard in such frosts for those who have to live outside. Well, birds, animals, they're at least used to it. But people. Even in their city, there were many homeless people. Helen often saw them at bus stops or near garbage cans. Those are the ones who have it hard. Those are the ones who should be sad. Not her, who had a warm, cosy home from her parents. Helen finally spotted a car with the emblem of the local taxi company and hurried towards it. She had to hurry, or someone would snatch it from under her nose. That's when Helen noticed her, a thin girl in a thin jacket, clearly not suitable for the season, stretched over a huge belly. The girl was standing near the fire exit and trying to warm up. She was stamping her feet, rubbing her hands together, shrugging her shoulders. She was clearly freezing in her spring jacket. Judging by the size of her belly, the stranger would soon be heading to the maternity hospital. And what was she doing outside in such a state? Helen became curious, so she forgot about the taxi, came closer, and gasped in horror when she saw the girl's shoes, light sneakers, dirty and worn out. Her feet must have been completely frozen in them. The girl looked lost and frightened. Despair was visible in her beautiful dark eyes that took up half her face. "What's wrong?" Helen couldn't help but ask. Her heart ached with pity for this almost stiller girl. "Just cold," she replied, her voice trembling. "So why don't you go inside? The shopping centre is closing." "They kicked me out," the stranger lowered her eyes. "I'll wait until the security guard turns away and slip back in. I'll hide somewhere and spend the night." Her words sounded hopeless. "Are you homeless?" "No, I have a home. I just can't go there." "What happened?" Helen realized she couldn't remain indifferent to this story. She simply had to help this young, beautiful creature. It was impossible to just walk by. "It's a long story," the girl waved her hand. She kept her eyes on the security guard standing by the doors, and he, as if on purpose, was watching the entrance carefully. Not a fly would get past him. Soon the last visitors would come out, and the man in uniform would lock the door. The girl would be left outside. She definitely wouldn't survive the December frosty night. "Come to my place," Helen blurted out unexpectedly, and immediately she herself was frightened by her own words. Invite a complete stranger home? Who knows what she might be thinking? But looking once more at the lost, shivering, pregnant stranger, the woman understood. Yes, this was the only right decision now. The girl urgently needed to be warmed up. The rest could wait. The stranger looked at Helen with disbelief. "Are you serious?" Yes, of course," the woman declared more confidently. "I'll just call a taxi now." "Thank you so much." The girl still couldn't believe her luck. "I feel awkward imposing on you, but I have no other choice. Thank you very much." "You won't be imposing on me. I live alone anyway," Helen smiled, dialing the taxi number. She felt a surge of determination. On the way, both were silent. A tense silence hung in the car. But at home, in the warm kitchen, with the cake in the middle of the table, everything became somehow simpler, more natural. "Is it your birthday?" The girl smiled. How sweet she was. So fragile, big-eyed, graceful, and very young. Helen even doubted if she was 18. That remained to be seen. How did such a defenseless creature end up on the street on a frosty night? Where were her parents? Where was her husband or boyfriend, the father of this child? How could they all allow this girl to be left outside a shopping centre on a winter night? "My name is Alice," the girl introduced herself, looking around. "It's very cozy here." "And I'm Helen. I'll make some tea, and you can tell me everything, explain what happened to you. And we'll figure out together how to help you, okay?" "Thank you so much." Alice was clearly touched by such care. Tears even welled up in her eyes. She looked genuinely grateful. "Stay for now," Helen smiled at her. "Come, I'll show you the room where you'll sleep tonight." The woman led her guest to her parents' bedroom. Since their passing, almost nothing had changed here. A large double bed, a bookshelf with books, a spacious corner wardrobe. "Alice, it should be comfortable and cozy here," Helen said, trying to make her stay pleasant. "Wonderful room," the girl exclaimed happily, looking around. Helen returned to the kitchen and started bustling about. After about 5 minutes, Alice came to her, sat down at the table, and propped her chin on her hands. "I guess it's time to tell my story. You certainly have the right to know. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to me. I don't think I would have survived the night outside." "Yes, they're forecasting a strong frost tonight," Helen shook her head. Tell me what happened to you, and we'll figure something out together." "That's unlikely." The girl sighed sadly and began her story, delving into her memories. Alice was born in a small regional town. She was the eldest daughter in a large family, so from an early age she had to look after her 2 younger sisters and brother. The girl's parents were simple and strict people. They honored traditions and raised their children accordingly. Daughters and sons were to obey their elders without question. They were forbidden to have their own opinions. And I was always different from them, and different from my younger brother and sisters, Alice sighed. I felt like I was in prison there. I wanted to wear bright clothes, listen to loud music, go to discos. But my father forbade all of it, saying no one would marry a girl who went around like that. As if I needed that. I wanted to study. I dreamed of becoming a designer. Her parents, however, had different plans for their daughter. A designer? Well, yes, Alice drew quite well, but you couldn't make much money from that. So they sent the girl to a culinary college to get a profession that would provide a living. Helen sighed. In this, Alice's story echoed her own. After all, Helen had also been prevented from fulfilling her dream, to become a kindergarten teacher. So she had to work as a cutter in a workshop. And back then she couldn't disobey her parents. She thought they knew best. And Alice did exactly the same. When I turned 18, my father married me off. The girl's eyes filled with unspeakable sadness. She lowered her head and sighed heavily. Alice couldn't refuse. The matter had been decided long ago. She became the wife of her father's former colleague, a 40-year-old widower named Arthur. Once, during some military campaign, he had saved Alice's father's life, and her father now considered himself indebted to his old friend. He often looked at me when he came to visit us, Alice recalled. He had such a look, attentive and unpleasant, sticky somehow. I even got goosebumps down my spine. But I couldn't have imagined that this man would one day become my husband. That's almost a crime, Helen gasped. You were only 18, and he was 40. You're a child. He's a grown man. How did your parents agree to this? They were even happy, Alice smiled bitterly. Because we live in a poor town. Half the male population drinks, the other half works from morning till night and earns pennies. And Arthur? He's a former military man. He has a large, solid house, an expensive car, and a security business. The most enviable groom by local standards. Only he always scared me. He has a look like a reptile. He smiles, seems all kind, always brought us gifts, for me and my younger brother and sisters. But I was afraid of him. Of course, the news that I would have to become Arthur's wife shocked Alice. I begged my father not to do it, and I appealed to my mother, but unyielding. It must be done, that's all. Well, I resigned myself. What else could I do? And I was in love with my former classmate Mark then. I still am, honestly. It's so hard for me to believe this. Helen shook her head. This is in our time, in the 21st century, parents marrying off their daughter against her will to a grown man. It immediately reminds me of the painting, The Unequal Marriage. Do you know it? I do, the girl nodded, confirming her familiarity with the work. Well, that's just how things are there, Alice continued. What could I do? My opinion didn't matter to anyone. There wasn't really a wedding. Arthur didn't want one. We just sat in a restaurant. Alice's parents, the groom and bride, celebrated the event. And then the girl had to go to her now legal husband's house, and the family life of the very young Alice began. It was very difficult for the girl to suddenly part with her childhood and become essentially Arthur's domestic slave. He loved order very much, and the young wife was now supposed to maintain it. If Arthur noticed dust or a dirty plate somewhere, punishment followed. First, an hour-long sermon. He would monotonously drone the same thing. A woman must obey her husband. Mess in the house means mess in the head. Cleanliness is the key to health. But the worst part began afterwards. The man would lock Alice in the attic for the entire night. It was cold, dark, and scary there. "I'm still afraid of the dark," Alice admitted, a little embarrassed. Of course, there was no bed or mattress in the attic. The girl had to sleep directly on the hard, cold floor. The next morning, Arthur would let the offender out and continue acting as if nothing had happened. Alice also wasn't allowed to show her feelings, otherwise punishment again, a sermon and confinement in the attic. For minor offences, the punishment lasted only a few hours. For more serious ones, in Arthur's opinion, it lasted for days. Of course, Alice was afraid of the grown man. He had scared her before, and now... The girl tried to obey him in everything, but she couldn't always predict what he meant. Sometimes Alice felt that he was deliberately looking for a reason to find fault. Occasionally, Arthur would get drunk, sometimes alone, sometimes in the company of old friends, soldiers like himself. And then he would completely lose it. He would suddenly start seeing things that weren't there, shouting at someone, threatening someone with violence. It wasn't just words. The man would grab anything within reach, furniture, dishes, books, and furiously throw it all at an invisible enemy. At such moments, Alice would climb into the attic herself, or, if it was warm, run out into the yard. Arthur usually raged for a few hours, then calmed down, went to the bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, and fell into a long, deep sleep. Then Alice would crawl out of her hiding place and start cleaning, because if Arthur noticed the mess in the morning, he would, of course, be furious. Alice really didn't want to see her husband in that state. "Why didn't you tell your parents about this?" Helen gasped. "Arthur, he's probably not normal. It's dangerous to be around someone like that. Maybe he needs treatment." "Parents?" Alice smiled bitterly. "Who would listen to me? Arthur is one of the wealthiest and most respected people in our town. And my parents always considered me the most capricious, arrogant of the children. It was useless to talk to them. They would just say again that I thought too much of myself." "Well, what if you had called doctors? During one of his fits, when he talks to someone invisible and throws things at them." "Doctors might have taken him away until morning, and then he would have come back to me very angry for turning him in, you see? I can't even imagine what he would have done to me then. I still don't know exactly what happened to his wife. No one knows." "You said he was a widower?" "Yes, that wife, the first one, was also about 15 years younger than Arthur. She wasn't from our town. He brought her from somewhere. She had no friends or relatives here. Quiet, silent, withdrawn. Now I understand why. I didn't know her very well. I just saw her sometimes in the store or met her on the street, and I wasn't interested in that woman. Why would I be? I was still a child then. Kind of strange. Oh well." One day, returning from school, Alice noticed a crowd of people near Arthur's house, and although it wasn't on her way, the girl turned onto the next street. Alice wanted to walk past Arthur's gate to find out what was going on there. It turned out to be a funeral. Among the crowd, the girl noticed her father and mother. She ran up to them and asked, "What happened?" "Arthur's wife died," her mother replied, shaking her head sadly. "How? Why? What happened?" Alice couldn't comprehend it. She had seen the woman recently. She looked a little pale, anxious as always, but Arthur's wife was young and healthy. What could have happened? "It's none of your business," her father said, pushing his daughter in the back. "Go home now. Don't stand around. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." That night, Alice still overheard her parents' conversation. Her mother and father were sitting in the kitchen discussing what had happened, thinking all their children were asleep. "And yet I don't understand," her mother's voice sounded worried. "How could she fall from the second floor? You'd have to try hard to do that. The railing is high." Arthur explained she was drunk, and when people are drunk, they do all sorts of things. Laura didn't seem like an alcoholic. "Seems like it, doesn't seem like it. Are you an expert?" Judging by her father's tone, this conversation angered and irritated him. "Don't talk nonsense. Stupid housewives are clucking, and you're happy to pick it up. Specialists conducted an investigation. It was an accident. End of story." Various rumours circulated in the town for a long time. Many didn't believe that Arthur's wife had accidentally fallen down the stairs and died. But time passed, and the story, if not forgotten, lost its sharpness, somehow. Alice feared her father's friend even more since then. And of course, the news that she was to become his wife shocked the girl. But the girl understood that she had nowhere to go. She couldn't go against her parents' will. "But how could they?" Helen threw up her hands. "I don't understand your parents at all. If they knew what kind of person he was, if they even allowed the thought that he did something to his wife, how did it even occur to them to marry you off to him?" "But I told you, he's an enviable groom," Alice said. "Becoming related to someone like that is like winning the lottery. All doors are now open to my family in town. And as for me, well, my parents have other daughters and a son." There was so much bitterness, so much pain in those words, that Helen couldn't help but hug the fragile girl sitting in front of her tightly. Alice immediately relaxed in her embrace, as if she had been waiting for just that. Then she pulled away and continued her story. "About 6 months after the wedding, I realized I was pregnant. I was scared. I didn't want it. Arthur always dreamed of an heir. And I didn't want a child from that terrible man, because in our house, which was simply a prison, there would be another prisoner. It's one thing for me. I'm already grown up after all. But a defenseless baby in the hands of that monster, just imagine what he could do to him." Alice hid her condition for as long as she could, but the perceptive Arthur noticed the changes happening to his wife. "He guessed everything," Alice sighed. "He was happy. He took me to a jewellery store so I could choose whatever I wanted. Before, despite his behaviour and treatment, he wasn't stingy, but now he showered me with gifts every day and stuffed me with fruits and vegetables. And Arthur himself drove me to an expensive medical centre where I registered for pregnancy care." But all these gifts and her husband's care didn't make Alice happy at all. On the contrary, she was scared, very scared, and also disgusted and uncomfortable. Arthur hugged her in public, said he was happy, often confessed his love. But Alice remembered perfectly well how he locked her in the attic, called her names, and humiliated her for the slightest misdeeds. True, he never raised a hand to her. He wanted to sometimes, even very much. The girl saw it in the furious glint in her husband's eyes, but he restrained himself with incredible willpower. Only Alice understood that someday he would snap. She knew this, was 100% sure. And who knows, maybe then the fate of Arthur's first wife awaited her. Everyone would say later that she fell down the stairs or tripped on the steps and hit her head. Time passed, her belly grew. Alice already knew she was carrying a girl. Arthur had hoped for a son, so the news that they would have a daughter disappointed him a little. But Alice, on the contrary, was happy, because what if the son turned out to be like his father? How would she love him then? How would she raise him? But a girl. she would most likely resemble her mother. That is her. Arthur restrained himself with all his might, scolding and insulting his young wife for misdeeds, but no longer allowed himself to lock her in the attic. He said that as soon as she gave birth, she would get what she deserved in full. But for now, she needed to be taken care of. These words scared Alice. "I guess I resigned myself to this life," the girl admitted. "Adapted, maybe. I realized that in principle, if you play by Arthur's rules, you can live. Many husbands in our town beat their wives. It's almost normal. But Arthur never hit me once, and I had everything I wanted. I just had to ask." The other thing was that in such conditions, she didn't particularly want anything. Alice resigned herself to fate. She was preparing to become a caring mother and trying to be a good wife to Arthur. It seemed to her that her whole life was predetermined and nothing could be changed. But one day, the girl accidentally overheard her husband's conversation with his mistress. The fact that Arthur had affairs on the side while having a wife was not news to Alice. Yes, the man didn't particularly hide it. He sometimes came home in the morning, drunk, tired, smelling of women's perfume, collapsed onto the bed, and a minute later his powerful snoring could be heard. It didn't occur to Alice to make a remark or ask unnecessary questions. All the better, she would get less attention. What jealousy, what worries could there be? Let him do what he wants. It happened at night. For some reason, Alice's stomach hurt then, so the girl couldn't fall asleep at all, lying in bed and stroking her tense belly, trying to relieve the spasm herself. Arthur was in his study, supposedly working, sitting over some papers, writing something. Alice never delved into her husband's affairs. She wasn't interested. And then suddenly the phone rang. The girl became all ears. It was 2 a.m. People didn't just call at that time. She wondered what had happened. Her husband's voice sounded surprisingly soft, even tender. Alice had never heard it like that before. He called his interlocutor with affectionate words. "My love, my beauty, Ellen." It was so unusual that Alice even forgot about the pain in her stomach. Imagine Arthur, it turns out, can be like that too. "I missed you very much," Arthur confessed, his voice full of tenderness. The interlocutor replied, and Alice only heard her husband's remarks. "Of course, I miss you too, but you know I have a lot of work right now, and I also need to keep an eye on my wife. She's a silly, naive girl, carrying my child. She might do something wrong, harm the child. Yes, I agree, it's unfair, but that's how it turned out." Alice was angered by the way Arthur spoke about her. A silly girl, doesn't understand anything, will harm the child, as if she were completely stupid. Meanwhile, the man continued the conversation. "Yes, as soon as she gives birth, we'll be together, we'll take the child from her, and she can go wherever she pleases. Yes, I promise." Fear overwhelmed Alice. Did she imagine it, or was Arthur really planning to commit a terrible act? The girl only heard her husband's remarks, but even from them a lot was clear. "Well, of course, it's a pity that you can't have children. A child is a priceless gift from a beloved woman, but you'll be a wonderful mother to my girl, better than young Alice, who doesn't understand anything about life yet." A problem? What problems could there be with her? You know I have connections everywhere. Everything will go smoothly. Alice can have more children later. She's young and healthy. What difference does it make to her? Alice's mind raced. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and the picture was anything but cheerful. It turns out Arthur had a mistress, a certain Ellen. It seemed he had strong feelings for her. One would think, why didn't he marry the lady of his heart then? Why marry a naive, foolish girl who didn't even know life yet? Apparently, it was all because this Ellen couldn't bear her man a child. That happens, but the couple absolutely needed an heir. So Arthur married young Alice to use her as an incubator and then send her away. And why not? He was the local king and god. He could do whatever he wanted. He would push her back to her parents, and they would still scold their unfortunate daughter for not being able to be a good wife to such a wonderful man. And her child, her little daughter, would be raised by a complete stranger, this Ellen. The little one stirred gently in Alice's belly at that moment. A wave of such tenderness flooded the future mother's heart. No, she would never, ever give this child away to anyone. Alice already loved her little one and had no intention of parting with her. But Arthur, he was so strong and influential in this town, he had everything covered. Alice wouldn't dare to utter a sound. She would be accused of failing in her parental duties, or maybe she would suddenly be diagnosed with something. Or maybe the police would find some substances in Alice's handbag. Nothing could be ruled out. Arthur had long arms. He was one of the masters of their small town. Well, since she had nowhere to hide from her influential husband in town, there was only one thing left: to run away from here as far as possible. However, a whole series of serious questions immediately arose before Alice. Where to run? Where and on what to live? How to explain her disappearance? She was due to give birth in a couple of months. By then, she needed to settle in a new place. Wandering the world alone was one thing, but with a newborn baby in her arms. But staying with Arthur was dangerous. He was a terrible person. While Alice was carrying his child, he might not touch her. But what would happen later, when Arthur wanted to take the little one and Alice started to resist? This girl wasn't going to find out. The very next morning, Alice gathered all the jewellery her husband had ever given her and took it all to a pawn shop. They paid her enough money to live comfortably for several months in a strange city, but after that she would still need some source of income. And Alice was unlikely to be able to work with a baby in her arms. The girl decided she would deal with problems as they arose. As long as she had money, she would see what happened next. Alice packed her belongings into a travel bag. She also added a few items she had already bought for her daughter. She didn't want anything belonging to her child to remain in that house. Having dressed, the fugitive was not dressed for the weather. Her winter clothes were left hanging on the rack in the hallway. Otherwise, Arthur, coming home, would immediately notice their absence and start asking where his wife had gone without permission. And that gave Alice extra time. Who knows, maybe these would be crucial hours or even minutes. The girl put on an autumn jacket and sneakers, reasoning that nothing terrible would happen. She would be travelling by taxi after all. She wouldn't freeze. Arthur had left on his business. He was often away from home for days. Alice decided to take advantage of her husband's absence, called a taxi, and went to the bus station. There, she boarded the first available bus, which brought her to the city where Helen lived. Fate had brought her here. At the station, I realized I had been pickpocketed, the girl continued her story. Most likely, it happened when I was getting on the bus. There was a crowd near the entrance back in my town, and at one point there was a crush. That's when someone took my wallet from my bag. And Alice was left with nothing, without money and without support in a strange, unfamiliar city, and dressed in a light jacket and sneakers, clothes completely unsuitable for the unusually frosty December. A desperate situation, to say the least. I went to the nearest shopping centre, Alice said. At least it was warm there. I had some change left in my pocket, enough for lunch. But I had no idea what to do next. I only knew one thing. I definitely couldn't go back home, because Arthur, He had clearly noticed my absence and was furious. I didn't even want to think about what he might do to me. "So you only arrived here today?" Helen clarified, amazed by her story. "Yes, this afternoon. I was incredibly lucky that you took me in." "Let's use you, informal." Helen smiled at her guest. "I'm more used to it." "Okay," Alice agreed, a little embarrassed. "He'll look for you, of course, but I don't think Arthur will immediately realize I'm not in town. Right now, he'll start shaking down all my relatives and friends. By the time he figures it out, enough time will have passed, and I'll be gone from here to a place where he won't find any trace of me. But I don't know how." "Listen, what if he goes to the police? You'll be reported missing, and I think they'll find you very quickly." "He won't. I left him a note asking him not to look for me, and I slipped the same note under my parents' door. I explained that I left on my own and don't want to be looked for. But he will. He will look for me. He doesn't need me, but the child." Alice gently stroked her belly at these words. Helen, despite the tense situation, couldn't help but smile. This girl would be a very good and caring mother, it was clear right away. But what should she do with Alice? How could she help her? "Here's what," Helen said, making a decision. "Stay with me for now. If anyone asks, I'll explain that you're a distant relative from the countryside, but it's unlikely anyone will be curious. We don't socialize much with the neighbors here. So live here and don't worry about anything for now, at least until summer, and then we'll see. Maybe something will become clear." "Really?" A bright smile lit up Alice's face. The girl became even more charming. Her eyes sparkled, and cute dimples appeared on her cheeks. "Of course," Helen nodded. "Where else would you go in your condition? You can't go to the police, as I understand it. There seems to be no crime committed. All that's left is to keep hiding. Arthur won't think to look for you at a complete stranger's house." "I don't even know what to say. No words are enough to express my gratitude. If it weren't for you, my child and I probably wouldn't be here anymore. We would have just frozen somewhere under a fence." "Everything will be all right," Helen smiled. It was pleasant to feel like a savior. And now Helen wasn't alone. There was a person in the house who needed her attention and care. And soon a little one would be born. That was true happiness. The days flowed one after another. Helen continued to go to the factory, and Alice stayed at home during this time. She wasn't idle. She cleaned, cooked, and sewed diapers for the baby on Helen's sewing machine. Helen herself now returned home in a completely different mood. She always bought something tasty on the way to please Alice. The girl needed positive emotions after everything she had been through. And Helen's refrigerator was now always stocked with fruits and vegetables. Pregnant women need vitamins. In the evenings, Helen and Alice watched TV or talked about various topics. The young girl turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist with a wonderful, easygoing nature. She told Helen everything that was on her mind, shared her deepest secrets. "I've never been so open, even with my mother," Alice confessed. "And you understand me and support me in everything." Helen was pleased by these words. She truly felt almost like this girl's mother. And why not? By age, she could well have been her daughter. And the woman sincerely didn't understand how could Alice's parents have treated her like that? Why did the girl have to seek support and shelter in a strange, unfamiliar city, and not from her own family? Did her mother and father not understand what a happiness it was to have such a sweet, kind daughter? One day, Alice told Helen about Mark, a boy from her class with whom she had a romance back in school. "He's wonderful, very good. He courted me so beautifully." Alice's eyes sparkled with genuine joy at the mention of the young man's name. It was clear that the girl still had feelings for him. Can you imagine Mark, while still in school, went to work part-time at a car repair shop for me to earn money for movies, cafes, flowers, gifts? He was ready to do anything for me. Alice also loved the handsome classmate. They spent a lot of time together and even made plans for the future. Then Mark went into the army, and when he returned, Alice was already married. Mark was upset then, angry with the girl, but later he understood what was what. He came to Alice when Arthur wasn't home and urged her to run away. "I wanted to do it so much," Alice recalled. "Run away with Mark, far, far away, where no one would find us. But then I realized I couldn't. Arthur, he would definitely find us. Mark wouldn't be able to get a job officially because Arthur would immediately find out about it. He has connections everywhere, you see. I don't even know what Arthur would have done to him, to both of us. I didn't want to ruin Mark's life. He didn't deserve it. And that's why I had to refuse." "What a sad and romantic story," Helen sighed. "Well, it turns out things like this happen not only in movies. So what about Mark?" "Mark. He was offended then, decided that I preferred an old, rich husband and a comfortable life, that I betrayed our feelings. It was so painful, so hurtful, but I didn't try to convince Mark otherwise. It was even better for him to think that way. Otherwise, he would have tried to save me, and that would have ended very badly for him." A month passed unnoticed. The due date was approaching. Everything in Helen's house was ready for the arrival of the little one. The woman eagerly awaited the joyful moment. Could it be that a child would finally appear within these walls? It was simply incredible. They decided to convert her father's study into a nursery. They put a crib against the wall, which Helen had bought for a pittance from an ad. The woman sewed the bedding herself from wonderful soft pink fabric and even made a light canopy. It turned out to be a beautiful crib for a little princess. The woman often admired the work of her hands and imagined the joyful moment when Alice would place the tiny girl here. Alice couldn't give birth in a hospital. Arthur had probably already put out a description, and as soon as his wife appeared in a maternity hospital, he would immediately find out. Helen had arranged with an experienced midwife. As soon as the time came, she would arrive after a call and deliver the baby. After all, Alice's pregnancy had gone well, and home births had become very popular lately. So there was nothing particularly special about doing without a maternity hospital. Alice was immensely grateful to Helen for such care. The girl assured her that as soon as she had the opportunity, she would definitely do something for the kind woman in return. Helen just smiled. Alice couldn't imagine how much she was already doing, simply by trusting her so much and brightening her sad loneliness. Next to Alice, Helen felt needed, useful, strong. One day, Helen returned from work early. The power went out at the factory, and the management sent everyone home. On the way, the woman stopped by a store to buy some groceries and also picked up Alice's favourite fruit curds. Let the girl be happy. Helen opened the door with her key and quietly entered the hallway. What if Alice was sleeping? Lately, this happened often. It was understandable. Her body was gathering strength before childbirth and the upcoming sleepless nights. The house was silent. And then Alice's voice came from behind the closed bedroom door. She was talking to someone on the phone, and the girl's voice sounded harsh, firm, even commanding. She had never spoken in such a sharp manner. Helen involuntarily froze and listened. "You want to get your child? Prepare the money," Alice instructed her interlocutor. "What you've already paid is not enough. If the required amount isn't here within 3 days, I'll fall from a windowsill somewhere onto a railing, and that's it. You won't be able to prove anything. I accidentally slipped. My belly pulled me over." Helen cringed near the door. What was happening? Could these words belong to the sweet, quiet Alice? She wondered who she was demanding money from. From Arthur? But it was his child. And according to Alice, Arthur was so all-powerful, all-seeing, that it was dangerous to call him. He would figure out where his wife had disappeared to. Alice was very afraid of her husband and was unlikely to dare to talk to him. Then what? "Think faster," Alice continued. "If you throw me another handout hoping to stall until the birth, I'll give birth. How can I get out of it? But I'll leave the child at an orphanage. You won't even know which city it happens in. Can you imagine how many abandoned babies appear in such institutions every day across the country? You'll be exhausted looking for your daughter, and you won't have much time because healthy newborns are quickly adopted." The image of this new Alice did not at all match the modest, quiet girl Helen had sheltered. This Alice behaved harshly, boldly. She masterfully manipulated her interlocutor, dictated her terms, and most importantly, threatened. Alice hung up and dialed someone else. This time her voice sounded completely different, friendly, even somewhat tender. Helen caught every word. She had to finally understand who she had taken in. "Yes, Mark, I called them. No, I'm sure. Yes, you're right, I know how to talk to them. That's exactly how I talked. If they really want to see their daughter alive, they'll bring the money to the agreed location. And you watch the place, okay? Just be careful and cautious. They might involve the police. Although probably not, of course, after I scared them like that. Yes, I'm doing well. No, this simpleton doesn't suspect anything. Everything's easy with her. She takes care of me, feeds me goodies, can you imagine? You were right, she's a gullible fool. I feel good. Yes, Helen tiptoed to the front door. The conversation was clearly coming to an end. The woman didn't want Alice to guess that she had been overheard. Helen was simply afraid of her reaction, and she didn't yet understand what to do or how to handle this situation. The woman went out into the yard and headed to the gazebo her father had built years ago. The family used to spend wonderful evenings here. Her mother would brew fragrant tea, her father would grill kebabs. It was good. And now Helen sat in that cozy gazebo and tried to comprehend what she had just heard. So, Alice was not at all who she pretended to be. She didn't seem like a timid, quiet victim. On the contrary, this girl was demanding money from people. And how skillfully Alice had told all those stories all this time. Captivating, simply a talented actress. Helen had opened her heart to her, truly a simpleton, and Alice had an accomplice, Mark. So Mark did exist after all. Perhaps that was the only truth the guest had told her, and everything else was under a very, very big question mark. But why was Alice willing to sacrifice her child if she didn't get the money? Maybe she was just lying. Why was someone willing to pay for this baby? Maybe this Arthur wasn't a tyrant at all, but a victim. Helen knew only one thing. She couldn't let Alice know she was aware. It seemed this girl was a real monster, putting on the role of a poor lamb. She was so easy to believe, a defenseless, fragile young creature, and pregnant too. But Helen couldn't stay overnight in the same house with Alice either. It was too dangerous. On the spot, the woman concocted a story about a business trip where she was supposedly being sent by the factory. This had never happened, but how would Alice know? She had been living with her for just over a month. She was unlikely to suspect anything. Helen called a friend and asked if she could stay overnight. She said she had fumigated her house for cockroaches and couldn't be there for now. So, one problem solved. All that remained was to warn Alice, and in such a way that she would believe it unconditionally. A business trip? Great. Alice smiled, listening to Helen. It must be very interesting. When I send my daughter to kindergarten, I'll definitely get a job too. Can't wait. You'll have time, Helen smiled. The woman tried her best to seem natural, not to betray her shock. By evening, Helen had made up her mind. Of course, she needed to contact the police first. The eldest son of her colleague, Tom, worked there. Helen had known him since childhood. He definitely wouldn't refuse to help her. After saying goodbye to Alice, they even hugged at the front door, Helen went straight to the nearest police station. On the way, she called Tom and explained that she had something to discuss with him. So the young man met the woman on the steps. "Hello, Aunt Helen," Tom said happily. "Come in, I'll show you my office." Helen smiled. This young man called her aunt. Yes, she was probably really very old now. How difficult it was to get used to this. In the office, sitting on a hard plastic chair, Helen told Tom everything. He listened attentively, without interrupting. In his police uniform, and with a serious expression on his face, he looked unusually grown up and composed. After Helen finished, Tom asked if she had a photo of this girl. "Yes," she replied immediately. "We took pictures when we celebrated New Year." The woman took out her phone, scrolled through the gallery, and finally stopped at the right photo. It was a selfie. Helen and Alice were sitting arm in arm in front of a set table, smiling at the camera. "Her face looks familiar, by the way," Tom said thoughtfully. "Let me transfer the photo to my computer and run it through the database. Then I'll contact you, okay?" "Okay, thank you so much," Helen said with relief. "It's nothing yet," Tom shrugged. Feeling she had done her duty, Helen went to her friend, who was already waiting for her. Well, she had done everything she could. Now, whatever would be, would be. She had 2 days of a supposed business trip. Maybe something would be revealed during that time. Everything was revealed much sooner. Tom called Helen the very next day after lunch. "Well, Aunt Helen, we got your—" Helen couldn't believe her ears. "Alice, you mean?" "No, she's not Alice, she's Diane. Come to the station after work. I'll tell you everything. Thanks to you, I now have a major case solved to add to my record. So thank you." "You're welcome," Helen replied automatically and hung up. The woman couldn't wait until the end of the workday, so she went to the workshop manager and asked for time off. It was fine. She didn't do it often, unlike many other colleagues. To find out the truth as quickly as possible, Helen called a taxi. It would take too long by bus. Tom met Helen on the steps again. His eyes shone with joy, a smile didn't leave his face, and healthy colour bloomed on his cheeks. Helen was back in Tom's office. He didn't beat around the bush. He immediately began his story. As he narrated, Helen's eyes widened in surprise. She expected anything but this. Alice turned out to be Diane. She was indeed born in a small town, in a large family, and had always dreamed of getting rich, just like her friend Mark. Together, the young people came up with this plan. In their town lived an influential, wealthy businessman who was indeed named Arthur. But he never considered marrying Diane. He already had a wife. Their marriage was almost 20 years old, and everything in the family was good, simply wonderful. Except for one thing, Arthur's wife, Ellen, couldn't have children. The man spared no expense, sending his beloved to the most expensive clinics, even calling doctors from abroad. Ellen underwent many procedures and IVF, but nothing helped. The longed-for pregnancy never occurred. Diane knew about this story because she worked part-time as an orderly at the local family and reproduction center. She had seen Ellen and Arthur many times and was aware of their situation. At the right moment, she simply approached the distraught Ellen and offered her services. "I can carry a child for you," the girl said. "I accidentally overheard your situation. I feel so sorry for you, and I really need money. Think about it. I'm young, healthy, strong. I can carry a wonderful baby, and your dream will come true." Ellen looked at the girl with distrust, but still took her phone number and said she would call if necessary. "Yes, of course," she called back. The unhappy woman was ready to do anything to become a mother. Ellen understood that she couldn't carry a child herself. So what was wrong with another woman doing it? What difference did it make how her child came into the world? The main thing was that there would be one at all. Arthur supported his wife in this decision. And so Diane was implanted with the embryo of Arthur and Ellen's future baby. The child took hold and began to grow and develop. Diane was initially an ideal surrogate mother. She took vitamins, visited doctors, followed all instructions. And then she disappeared. She unexpectedly vanished from the town, leaving Ellen and Arthur completely in the dark. They were already imagining themselves as parents and had even prepared a nursery for their daughter. And then this. Ellen cried all day. Arthur tried to find the fugitive. No one understood what had happened, but soon everything became clear. It turned out the surrogate mother's disappearance was part of a plan carefully thought out by Mark and Diane. Diane had never planned to simply give birth to the child and hand her over to happy parents. They had promised a sum for the baby that would be enough to buy a large apartment in the city. But Diane and Mark dreamed of more and intended to extort a fortune from Arthur. The couple planned to go to Thailand after a successful deal, buy an apartment there, and live as they pleased, without worrying about money. Diane needed to hide. The couple didn't have money to rent accommodation for a long time. But Mark knew that Helen lived in the neighbouring city, a lonely, trusting woman who was so easy to deceive. He had accidentally found out about her from some acquaintance. It would be a good place to stay for a while. No one would look for them there. Everything went smoothly. Diane played the part of a poor, unfortunate girl in a desperate situation in the parking lot near the shopping centre. Helen, of course, fell for it and invited her home. "But wait," Helen interrupted Tom. "Please explain how Mark knew about me after all." "An acquaintance of his works at your factory," Tom explained. "He happened to mention in conversation that they have a woman there, Helen. When Mark told him that his girlfriend planned to become a surrogate mother, it just came up in conversation. This acquaintance mentioned that you also dream of a child and so on. And Mark, he's a cunning fox. He seized on that information and sniffed everything out. Well, there you have it. They watched you for a few days and staged this supposedly accidental meeting. Sorry, Aunt Helen, but you really acted foolishly." "I know," the woman didn't argue. That was true. Diane called Arthur on the phone. He left large sums of money at agreed locations in their town, and Mark picked up the envelopes. The couple had already accumulated a fortune in their account. But it wasn't enough for them. Greed ruined them. And chance also helped. You returned from work early and overheard the conversation. "Well, the rest is clear. You probably left me the photo. I ran it through the database and found a match." Arthur did eventually contact the police, professionally but cautiously, without unnecessary fuss. Because if Diane had seen her pictures in newspapers and on polls, who knows what she would have done to the child? "Yes," Helen said. "And now?" "Now everything is fine. Diane is where she needs to be, under police supervision. And right now she's giving birth in the prison infirmary. So the child will be born any minute. Diane won't have time to do anything to her. Then the baby will be given to the parents. That's the fate of the little one. She wasn't even born yet and has already been through so much." "Giving birth right now?" Helen became worried. There was a crib in her room for this little one. The woman wasn't indifferent to the baby's fate. "Can I somehow find out if everything is okay with the baby?" "Of course, Aunt Helen, I'll call you back. Don't worry, go home. Only, we made an arrest there. It's probably a mess at your place. The guys tracked dirt in." "It's all right," Helen replied, no longer thinking about the mess, but about the child's fate. The house greeted the woman with silence. Helen was used to the smiling, talkative Alice, that is, Diane, living here. And now she was alone again. There would be no more shared dinners and conversations over tea. No warm, swaddled infant would be placed in the crib prepared with such love. Yes, Alice Diane had managed to inflict an emotional wound on the woman who, out of foolishness and naivety, had sheltered her. And Arthur and Ellen. Helen couldn't even imagine what the parents, who had dreamed of a child so much and almost lost her, must have been feeling all this time. But for them, everything would be fine now. Their daughter was about to be born, and thanks to her, Helen, the girl would be in the safe hands of her real mother and father, not in the power of criminals for whom the baby was just a thing, a bargaining chip, so it wasn't in vain. Helen sighed, filled a bucket with water, and began to wash the floors. The police officers had indeed tracked dirt in on their boots from the street. Helen walked up to Annie and picked her up. The girl was growing fast. She was quite heavy now. But it was a very pleasant weight, filled with love. The little one wrapped her small arms around Helen's neck and kissed the woman on the cheek. At that moment, there was no one happier in the world than Helen. She knew that the girl sincerely loved her and missed her nanny when she took a day off. True, Helen herself also missed the girl very much and tried not to leave the house unnecessarily. But sometimes she still had urgent matters. "The mean aunt visited me in my dream again," Annie whispered confidentially right into Helen's ear. "She wanted to take me." "It was just a dream," the woman smiled, tucking a strand of light hair that had fallen onto the girl's face behind her ear. "I know, but that aunt visits me often in my dreams. She's beautiful, but mean." Helen sighed. Annie simply couldn't know what had happened to her shortly before birth. It was impossible. But why did she repeatedly dream of a mean, beautiful aunt who by description closely resembled Diane? Helen discussed this issue with Ellen, the girl's mother. The women didn't know what to think. It remained a mystery. Could the little one have somehow sensed and remembered something while in the surrogate mother's womb? Helen became very good friends with Ellen. They were the same age and agreed on most matters, and the women understood each other well. After all, both had the same dream of motherhood and the same pain. Ellen had managed to become a mother, while Helen was now the baby's godmother and part-time nanny. Because Ellen and Arthur worked a lot, and someone needed to look after the girl. After everything that had happened, the couple were afraid to hire someone off the street. They didn't want to let just anyone near the child. The parents already had a sad experience. They didn't want to go through something similar again. The idea of getting to know the woman who had saved Annie better came to Arthur himself. He reasoned that Helen was a very kind, responsible person since she had sheltered the pregnant Diane. Naive, perhaps. But that was better than cunning and deceit. Arthur and Ellen came to Helen one evening. About 2 weeks had passed since Diane's arrest. The sleeping baby was with them. Helen couldn't take her eyes off the girl for a long time then. She looked, smiled, rejoiced that she was in the hands of loving parents. The couple thanked Helen for helping to expose Diane and Mark. "If it weren't for you, I can't imagine what would be happening to our Annie, to us, right now," Ellen said with a trembling voice. Tears appeared in her beautiful turquoise eyes. It was clear the woman hadn't fully processed the whole situation yet. But what did I do? What did I do that was so special? Helen was embarrassed. And anyway, it was a coincidence that I came home at the right time. Just a fortunate turn of events, which means fate. We have a business proposition for you, Arthur announced. We're looking for a nanny for the little one, and you are the person we can trust. How does that sound? Helen was speechless for a moment. A wave of joy washed over her. In those few minutes, she had become attached to Annie and had grown to love these polite, kind people. And then such an offer. There was nothing to think about. Of course, she agreed. And so 3 years passed. Helen lives in the guest house at Arthur and Ellen's place and happily looks after Annie. Her dream has finally come true. In a peculiar way, of course, but still. Helen didn't become a preschool teacher or a mother, as she had wanted, but she has the most beloved little girl to care for, and reliable, understanding friends, Arthur and Ellen, close people. Now, Helen is not alone. The woman carried Annie into the house, sat her at the table, and placed a bowl of oatmeal with fruit in front of the girl. "Well, shall I tell you a fairy tale?" Helen asked, smiling. "Yes, a fairy tale," the little one clapped her hands happily. "About a princess who was taken by a wicked witch, but then everything turned out well." "Okay," Helen smiled. "Listen, just don't forget to eat." Annie nodded and set to work diligently. Helen couldn't help but smile again, looking at the happy child. She was truly happy.